It's great. It starts with an earthquakes. Do 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 do. Do. All by myself. Don't wanna be all by myself. Sup, Holy Cow 343. Thanks for the check in. Sup, Saring in, Attritionalist. How's it going? How's everyone doing? How's everyone doing? It's been 9 months. 9 months since I started this podcast, or this, not really a podcast, a stream. Stream of consciousness stream. Where I was like, yeah, it's over, guys. America's over. I'm just trying to commentate throughout its overness. Tired my whole weekend. Got distracted by the war. Missing the war. Do. Work. You ever wonder what it was like back in World War One times or World War Two times? You know, especially I guess like for middle-aged people like myself, right? Just like, well, I guess we're going to war. You ever think about what it was like in Europe back in the 19 whatever? Everyone's all gung ho for war at first. In World War One, yeah, that's what they don't teach you. Everyone was gung ho because that's what hubris does. They were all on top. The white peoples were all on top, and they assumed that their white power was going to beat all the other white powers. They didn't know what, because they had spent their entire time beating on Africa, beating on Asia, beating on people who didn't have that technology. So each of these imperial places, Britain, France, Germany, whoever, Russia, they all were like, well, we had a pretty good record against all our other combatants. Why not? It's like you know how in boxing, I don't know, I might be talking on my ass here, but you know how in boxing there's like, oh, what's up, Core 6 Beaver? Boxing, there's like, especially with good up and coming talent, they try to arrange it so that they never have a loss on their professional record. Part of that is because they're really good, but the other part is people are always selecting people who are good enough, but not quite good enough to actually beat the dude, right? They always pick favorable situations, and like most of Western imperialism, just having industrial base was obviously an insurmountable lead that all these colonized places could never combat. So, for hundreds of years, white people, for the most part, most of their wars were against non-white people, and so there was a lot of just rolling. And I guess after the age of imperialism kind of like completed, after the scramble for Africa in the late 1800s was done, well, they were like, well, how hard could it be? We beat everyone else. Now we just have to beat these British, these French, or the British thing. We just have to beat these Germans, whatever, and then we'll have total dominance, right? That's the idea. World War One. All the people, even the fucking communists, back in the day were like, see, this is why Western leftism and Western Marxism is already bankrupt. Because even those retarded, quote unquote, Marxists were like, yeah, let's cheer for our country for war, without really, like, you know, understanding that all this war was not actually for the country, but for the rich people of that country, to either get more territory, to either sell more ammunition and weapons for warfare, to whatever the fuck, you know, lower the population that could revolt against them in a communist uprising, right? You know, all these sorts of benefits came to the bourgeoisie. You know, more land, whatever. You know, if Germany had won, you know, it wasn't splitting its spoils to the German public. It was mostly going to the rich, right? So even Lenin was like, what is going on? Why are these Western Marxists all gung-ho about this war? Well, he basically figured out that they were all basically still on the payroll. These leftists were all on the fucking payroll. As they are today. You know, the past week I talked about, you know, Alyssa Liu and the Epstein stuff being like glossed over by these Nazis. I call them goy cattle Nazis because they're basically controlled by Zionism, right? You know, like 4chan and all these other places, they're controlled by Zionism. Now we get a lot of the goy cattle Trotskyite bullshit. You know, now we're getting all this fucking, like, you know, it's just all this equivocating, blah, blah, blah. You know, some, you know, retarded liberals are bringing up the feminist angle again, like fucking retards who actually still believe in that shit. You know, there's that for that crowd, and then there's, well, you know, the only part I don't like about it is that Trump did it illegally, all this fucking equivocation, but really being on board because it threatens Israel and is what Israel wanted, right? We have all these retards saying that, like, you know, supporting Iran is like anti-American or anti-Semitic or whatever the fuck they want to call it, right? It's all just goy cattle, Trotskyite shit now that's being disseminated to all of us goyim, you know. Sup, Wi-Fi? Check in the goy. Yo Bagoya, yo Shinoya, yo Bagoya. We're all, you know, that's what, like, both Western leftism and Western rightism, like I said before, it's nothing but white supremacist Trotskyism or white supremacist Nazism, which ultimately both implicitly and explicitly support white supremacist Zionism, because Zionism is the new wrapper in which white supremacy is contained. And, you know, it's just so fucking annoying to see the same fucking goy slop on the timeline be recycled. And people being like, you know, you got the goy cattle Nazis being like, oh yeah, Hitler, we all need to apologize to Hitler, blah blah blah, like fucking retarded bullshit nonsense. And then you have the goy cattle Trotskyites being like, well, you know, the anti-fascists are in fact the fascists, and all this blah blah left blah blah left wing blah blah blah. It's hard to even say who's left and who's right anymore. But that's kind of like the point. I just, like, all Western politics is just white supremacist in nature. That's the thing that really needs to be honed in on over everything else. You know what it is? I mean, besides the obvious, right? Like, capitalism in general is built on maximum exploitation of the human individual for their labor and resources, etc., etc., right? And so racism came out of the idea that might is right, right? Like, whoever stronger gets to call the shots, gets to write history, gets to be on top, right? Law of the jungle, right? That's what capitalism's final kind of creed goes into, that kind of also justifies that ideology of white supremacy or racism or whatever. And so all Western politics is seeking to justify that first movement, that first like positing of white supremacy as a truth, right? So in the case of Nazism, it's clear, right? It's that it's the same kind of line that Hitler gave, right? It was that white people are, you know, the creators, the people who are on top, the people who deserve to, you know, because might is right. They, you know, through their ingenuity and their creativity, they became, you know, their soulful existence, you know, like, you know, the other races were too animalistic and too, you know, backward and uncivilized to understand this, but then the whites were not. So Hitler was merely trying to say, hey, we're on top right now, but this communism thing could kind of stop that from happening. So who came up with communism? Well, there was this Jewish guy named Karl Marx. Plus, you know, there were a lot of Jews in Soviet Russia. Therefore, it was because of the Jews that there was communism. And this communism thing is going to level the playing field. It's no longer going to allow this our white, you know, the white race to be creative and propagate. It's going to have to deal with these hordes of Untermenschen all in our midst. So these Jews just want to bring these Untermenschen into our shit, to fuck with our shit. And at the same time, they don't want to do any of the fucking work or whatever. They want to themselves, these Jews or whatever, they want to take the spoils out of Western civilization. So Hitler was all like, in order to keep white supremacy supreme, we gotta kick these Jews out of Germany so they don't, you know, allow these Untermenschen to come and their ideas of communism to come in. And we also need to get them out because they're exploiting our own people for their value, whatever. They're not doing any actual real work, or they're not productive, etc., etc., right? Two sides, whatever. Now, the white supremacist leftist, right, the one that's supposed to be anti-Nazi, right, they merely point out that, oh, the Nazis are only bad because they were anti-Jewish, right? When you learn about World War II, right, that's what you learn from these white leftists, right? That Hitler bad because he wanted to kill Jewish people. Like, that's all you understand from World War II. Like, if you were to ask, you know, a random American, why did the Nazis start World War II? And they will just say, oh, because he hated Jews. And you're like, wait, so then why wouldn't he just kick the Jews out or get rid of them himself. Why did he have to wait till the end of the war to do that if he really just didn't like Jews? Or why did he have to cause a war to begin with if he didn't like Jews? How does that make sense? Like, they don't really explain the steps involved. They just say to be Nazi is to be anti-Semitic, is to be anti-Jewish, whatever. They don't explain the whole white supremacist part, like, oh, we got to maintain imperialism, so we got to keep this communism thing out because it's preaching too much equality and shit. We gotta keep these non-whites, you know, as our goy cattle, as our Untermenschen cattle, you know. Sup, David Tay? David Tay, stop fucking asking me retarded questions like that. It's just so fucking annoying. Like, no, like, just fucking stop. I didn't make fucking a decision to move back to NYC on a whim. Like, oh no, I guess I can't come back to NYC. It's like fucking no. It's like the dumbest shit ever. I'm not gonna fucking change my entire life trajectory over a stupid fucking retarded nonsense bullshit fucking goy slop shit you see all the time on your fucking Instagram when you're doom scrolling. I don't fucking care. Anyway. So what is to be done, right? What is to be done? It's not enough to just know this, be outside of the fucking white supremacist doom loop of like, oh, you're a Nazi, oh, you're a communist, or all this fucking, like, you're a Nazi because you're Jewish, you're a communist because you're Jew, or like whatever, right? It's all this fucking retarded goy slop cycle of non, you know, resolution bullshit that they've all designed. So once you realize that, now what, right? I mean, that's been kind of like what I've been talking about for the past 9 months since I've talked about this, right? It's just been this fucking like I guess it's just been this kind of like thing that you know, you try to look for an analog, but even that feels dogmatic, right? You try like for example, I've been trying to conceptualize the current situation in America as in, you know, the terms of how did, you know, revolution happen in Soviet Russia? How did it happen in communist China or whatever it is? Right? Both required world wars, right? Even Lenin himself says we would not have gotten this revolution without this world war. You know, the contradictions of capitalism would not have been so stark and obvious, right? The main contradiction being what I just talked about, like how war might seem good for the country at first, I guess, but ultimately was just like in the immediate, it was just like sending you to your death by, you know, fucking German machine guns, just mowing you down, right? So that contradiction was so prevalent in the Russian masses that there was no other choice but to have a revolution. Now, would that revolution be necessarily a communist one? No, of course not. The initial revolution actually was a bourgeois one, right? Like with Kerensky and the provisional government and all that stuff. It wasn't until Lenin and the Bolsheviks were like unmoving on their policy of like, we are getting us out of the war. That was their one policy, and that was the policy that basically was like, yeah, all right, well, I'm supporting that party, right? And the only reason that had leverage was because they were in the middle of a war, right? Not this, not even, and so this war with Iran is not even at that level, right? Because, you know, it's not like millions of Americans are going and getting killed by Iranian forces or whatever at this point. So it's still so far removed from the consciousness of the average person that it's still just kind of like a, okay, what's next? You know. And in the case of China, right, same kind of thing where, you know, they had their civil war before the Japanese, and then once the Japanese invaded, they had to team up. But even through that experience, a lot of KMT people who were initially anti-communist, they were like, wait a second, why is our side not fighting the Japanese as hard? Why is our side kind of sitting back and relaxing, not doing the shit, making truces with the Japs at some points, and you know, doing all this fucking bullshit? Which is why, after World War II, you know, although the nationalists had more backing and support from the United States, a lot of them defected to the other side because they were like, you guys were a bunch of fucking scum. You weren't like even actually, like, that's the whole reason they lost the civil. They, despite having such an enormous advantage, right? Because this is the same KMT, remember, that chased the communists all around the country in the 1930s, right? With the Long March. It was the same KMT that like basically was crushing them, but then because of their experience with the Japanese, most of these people were like, yeah, these KMT people are fucking scum, and so they defected. You know, so in the midst of that, you can have communist revolution when you see the material results of your leadership being scum fucking people, and just kind of being like, well, that's not the side I want to fight for. And so we kind of have a similar sort of situation in America, but it hasn't really, but the idea has not fully synthesized with the material, right? I mean, we all know by now that, well, not all, right? There's just like a huge sizable proportion of people in America, especially in America, who just have their heads in the sand, you know? And, you know, part of the reason is because, you know, mainstream media obviously is trying to censor as much of this as possible, the link between Epstein and Israel and all this fucking, and to the obvious corruption in our government. You know, that's what the media is trying to bury as much as possible. But it is also kind of on the American public too, of like, you know, not being aware of it. A lot of people in America, it's kind of like, you know what I would equate it to? I think there was this quote, right? It was this quote where it was like, kind of like, being an American is like being the child of a mob boss and being angry that, you know, I forgot what it was. Like something like one day your house gets shot up or whatever, and being angry that happened. And just kind of like, well, where do you think that money came from, right? Like I think of like The Sopranos, right? That chick. I don't know. But just imagine yourself as just like a family member of the mafia, right? You have all this money, you have all this wealth, And you kind of know where it comes from, but you're not asking too many questions about it, right? Because you're just kind of like, well, it's comfortable. It's nice. I don't have to worry about anything. I don't have to work. I've got all this money, whatever. As long as I don't have to even necessarily do the family business shit, because I guess, because I guess, like, especially if you're, I guess, a woman or whatever, you're kind of kept apart from that. I don't know. Maybe I'm making shit up, but you're kept apart from the business. So you're like Carmen. You're like Carmen Soprano or whatever her name is, Carmela Soprano or whatever. You're just kind of like, oh, well, I feel like that's the average American, It's like by now, it's kind of on you, to not understand why America's so prosperous compared to everywhere else. If you keep buying that, oh yeah, it's because we're American and we are so ingenious. We come up with the right solution at the right time every time. That's why we're American exceptionalism, right? That's why we're on top. We're just so creative and can do, and if you're still thinking like that at this point, you're just kind of like that mafia family member who pretends not to know what the family does, right? I feel like most of us, if we're being honest, most of us were those family members, right? But I feel like, especially in the past 10 years, there was this statement, right? There was a statement by Malcolm X when John F. Kennedy died in 1963. He was asked, like, what are your thoughts? And he was like, well, when chickens come home to roost, I'm not sad, but I am glad. Basically, he was saying, like, what comes around what goes around comes around, right? Like, you can't just fucking mess with the rest of the world and expect nothing to happen to you back. In this case, it was the CIA, right? But, same kind of shit though, right? The violence in other people's affairs is going to, he could have been like the mob boss who was taken out by, underlings of the mob who wanted to be more like, mobby, right? You're still part of a mob, and that's why you were taken out. It could have just been by your own men. And so I think, like, the average consciousness in America is still at the point where it's like, don't ask, don't tell. A couple of years ago, I was a little bit more optimistic, right? Being like, maybe there's people that get it, right? There's people that see past this wokenomics shit, that are seeing kind of like, seeing the goy cattle Trotskyism that's being employed here. But then once the fucking Republicans won, once MAGA won in 2024 again, right? I feel like it revealed that they were just goy cattle Nazis the entire time, right? It just became like blaming China, blaming whatever, blaming everything else for their impotence. Never really being like, oh yeah, maybe we did benefit from this imperialism. Maybe that's why we did support it this entire time. Maybe this is why, we're a bunch of goy cattle this entire time. But of course, nobody likes thinking of themselves as goy cattle, or like people who did not choose their own actions, right? They want to be self-assured of their own independence and own kind of like freedom of being, right? Especially in America, right? This is the land of the free. But I think what's blocking most people, especially Americans, most Americans, from realizing the truth about America and its decline and its tie to Zionism is this kind of refusal to look within, you know, especially the white community, right? Being like, hey, how did I benefit from imperialism and racism since for so long? And what was my motivations for doing that? And how can I see that, you know, how can I see through all this goy slop now with that knowledge of, you know, self-negation? How can I kind of like sift through the goy slop and pick out what's actually relevant and what's essential to how to change things, how to get out of this fucking goy slop kind of circulation, this doom fucking cycle of goy slop, right? I think that this sort of thing is not going to come within the Western white community. White, it's never gonna come within the white community. Just like Western Marxism never materialized, like American Marxism is never going to materialize if it's led by the whites. It's just not. They refused to think dialectically, and to think dialectically requires self-criticism. So I've kind of changed my position then. So like, what is the non-white person to do? What is the Asian American person supposed to do? What is anyone supposed to do? Well, I can't speak for the white person or the black person or the non-Asian whatever person, because I'm not them, right? I don't know what's best for you, whatever, blah, blah, blah. But I guess, like, yeah, I mean, I've been saying this for the longest time, like, prepare a plan B, right? If you're an Asian American. If you're an Asian American dude, prepare a fucking plan B. Particularly, right? Let's see. Trotsky was against ending World War I because he saw it as brokering a peace with German imperialism. Exactly. He was fucking retarded. Seeing leadership grasping grape. Oh, yeah. No revolution, lol. Sun Yizhan passed away too soon. KMT could have been ran better. Is Sun Yizhan, is that Sun Moon or Sun Yat-sen? Is that another name for him? Followers of the KMT is a party in China. Victor Gao is a member of the what? Checking in SAR. Hey, I think Americans won't start to care until catastrophic economic downturn. Yes, exactly. Revolution in the U.S. will be led by black Americans. Well, not really either. Revolution in the U.S. will not be led by black Americans because they too have eaten the goy slop. They've become goy cattle themselves. They've become goy cattle Trotskyites. Not all, of course, but the overwhelming majority of black Americans who especially do things like glaze Obama or black celebrities like Oprah or Beyonce or whatever the fuck. They're all goy cattle to the Zionists. They provide the kind of like protection against the goy cattle Nazis, right? So they're kind of like built this kind of like opposition, circular opposition matrix between the Goy cattle Nazi whites and the Goy cattle Trotskyite black people, to be like, well, these Jews are, it's just because you're Nazis, you're white supremacists, so you're anti-Semitic, right? They've kind of like fused to get, like, the Zionists and the black liberals. They fused together this Afro-Zionism identity where being anti-black is being pro-white, and being pro-white is being anti-Semitic, and therefore, enemy of my enemy is my friend, retarded analytic sort of thing comes into play. And that's why the black Americans are just as goy cucked as the white Americans. Exactly. Black Americans got misled by people like Jay-Z. Exactly. Like, literally. He was, all that shit that Malcolm X said in the 1960s. Black Americans forgot all of it. And a lot of that was because of black liberals, literally, like, erasing his entire legacy. So yeah, not gonna hold out any hope for a Black American movement, because that's all been goy slopped since the 6-Day War, pretty much. But even before that, I don't know if you guys know this, but apparently the NAACP was initially created by both Jewish and black people, and mostly kind of controlled in the early goings by Jewish people who were Zionists. So it was all part of the plan. The real source of all this liberation from capitalism in general did not come from the black community. The Black American community did not come from the Native American community. Did not come domestically. It came from Vladimir Lenin. It came from the October Revolution. And then it came from Mao Zedong. That's where the root of getting out of the goy slop matrix actually comes from. It comes from communism, and not Jewish communism, right? That's the thing too. Like, I mean, Trotsky was Jewish, I guess. There was like a slight overrepresentation of Jews in the October Revolution. But then they got rid of Trotsky, and they got rid of a lot of Jews in the 1930s who showed a lot of Zionist tendencies, They don't really teach you that in Nazi lore, though. In the 1930s, a lot of those who got were some, like, Trotskyite Jews in the Soviet Union. The only reason why Jewish people get the communism gets the pro-Jewish kind of vibe to it is because the Soviet Union immediately after, the October Revolution stopped all the anti-Semitic stuff that was in place by the Russian Emperor, Tsar Nicholas or whatever, the second, whoever it was, third maybe. Because in 1882, there was a huge wave of anti-Semitism, especially in Ukraine. They're big Ukraine in our ass because they simply just had a lot more Jewish people than most of the rest of Russia. I think that's where most of the Jews who died during the Holocaust came from either Poland or the Ukraine area, because that's where most of them were. But yeah, after the Soviet Union came about, of course, Jews were pro-Soviet Union because they ended the Tsarist kind of like pogroms. So yeah, of course, Jews liked the government that was stopping their executions or lynching. It's like, yeah, that's why, you know, it would make sense that an Asian person would be pro-communist, right? Because like if you take an Asian person from say 1949, right, any random Asian person all over Asia, and you can't compare the average Asian person from 1949's position to 2026, and you're like, well, yeah, this was all predicated on the rising power of China. Even the American vassal states, they were only allowed to become that economically powerful because they were needed to counter the Chinese, right? That was all propaganda. They needed to, they gave uh, these Asian tigers a lot more autonomy than they did South America or, Africa, obviously, or even Southeast Asia, right? They needed to keep all the border states to China. They needed to keep them on the top of their game, or otherwise, China would be like, "Hey, look, they're not even doing that well. Like, why are you still capitalist?" That was the main reason they were given a lot more leeway, protectionism, all this other stuff. Since creepy, sleepy Joe Biden took office, a lot of similarities with title and stuff. Black Panther Party was closest to a revolution, but then they all got murdered by the FBI, CIA. Yep, that was the first and last time that Black Americans could have led a revolution. And you know what the biggest thing about that was? You know how I said that war with World War I was the kind of like objective event for the Soviet Union to form. And then the Civil War and World War II with Japan was how China formed. Well, during the Vietnam War, that was like 50, 60 years ago. That was like a time in American history where people were actually beginning to question capitalism. Like seriously, for the first time in American history, like people were like, "What are we even doing in Vietnam? What are we doing?" People coming back were telling these horror stories. What we were doing to like, these people who had no fucking technology. And it just seemed like, what is this freedom? All these contradictions started to become so clear to the majority of Americans. And then, that's when the Black Power movement split off from the Civil Rights movement. After the 67 kind of 6-day war, soon after that, Martin Luther King was killed himself. And so the Black liberal community almost immediately clowned his memory for their own interests. Because a year earlier, in 67, when he caped for Vietnam, the Black liberal American community fucking kicked him to the curb. Fucking said, like, he has nothing to... Like, Vietnam has nothing to do with this. Like, King is like, blah, blah, blah. He became, like, persona non grata. His approval rating with Black Americans itself was 25%. The Black American community kicked MLK to the curb in 1967. They don't tell you that. Of course, his approval rating was only an 8% or something for the white Americans, and you would expect that. That's fine, right? After speech on Vietnam. But in 67, polls show that even his approval rating with the Black community was 25%. And then he's killed exactly a year later. And then all the riots come, right? Because now it's like, oh, wait. you killed you killed our guy. Now the black liberals come back and be like, oh yeah, he was our guy the entire time. Forget that year that we kicked in the curb for CIA interests to removed all his security detail, removed all of his support so that he could be easily taken out. Forget that we did all that. He was our guy that you killed. That's why I like the black liberal. Like, the black liberal is a fucking goy cattle, like Trotskyite. That's what they are. You got the goy cattle Nazis and the goy cattle Trotskyites. But then out of the late 60s, I think Malcolm X died in 65, but out of him, came the Black Panther Party. They drew upon a lot of his ideas, along with Stokely Carmichael, I believe. They started a more aggressive anti-imperialist movement with Black Power. So the Black Panther and Kwame Ture, both by the late 60s, were endorsing kind of pro-Palestine movements, along with like Black Power movements. And so this was kind of like, now in the late 60s, early 70s, now the Vietnam War has become really unpopular after the Tet Offensive. And, people are like, what the fuck? What's going on? This is the moment where the Black Panther Party proved to be the most on the FBI's radar, the most on the CIA and the FBI's radar, because now it's like, now we have a situation where enough anger has come about. But then, like people said here, one of Black Panther's weaknesses was that they were infiltrated. Part of that was because they kind of like accepted anyone in their tent, even if they weren't Marxist-Leninists. So what happened apparently was that there would be infiltrators. There would be federal operative infiltrators, black federal operatives, who would pose as Black Panther Party people, but they would be more anarchist leaning. They would be more terrorist leaning. They would push for more and more crazier shit that the Black Panther Party should do, knowing that it would get the Black Panther Party in more trouble with the state, because now, like, you're giving the feds the pretext to take you down, right? So they would install these black these black feds who would be more anarchist leading in their, ideology rather than Marxist-Leninist leaning, to then justify kind of like state violence against the Black Panther Party, because now it's like endorsing terrorist activity, right? So that all went on during the 1970s, and then Black Panther Party pretty much dissolved by the 1983, I believe. But yeah, that was the last time there was an opportunity for kind of like a socialist revolution. But I think the feds, it was a concerted effort. It was the feds, it was the State Department led by Henry Kissinger. It was the Soviet Union's own kind of fuckery and chauvinism against Asia. There's a lot of factors that proved, there was a chance that America could have lost the Cold War. People don't really know this, but there was a very real chance that in the 1970s. But they rallied together. The empire struck back. They found a Vietnam for the Soviet Union themselves. They found Afghanistan for them. They You know, they found a way to recharge their economy by relying on Chinese labor. And they managed to kind of like shit on their former victors in Vietnam with the Khmer Rouge, right? They found a way to shit on communism and reverse the trends, be like, yeah, see, this is what communism leads to. It leads to genocide, leads to all this other stuff. Forget the fact that we aided the Khmer Rouge. That's not the headline here. Headline here is that they killed a lot of people. That's not on us, though. Wait, shh, God damn it. That's not what I wanted. I need this one. Damn it. This one. There we go. Anyway. Black liberal classes compromise black Americans. Let's see. A lot of similarities. Time, blah, 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 blah. Another war with Iran started. I'm facepalming at PMC America's stupidity for gushing, glazing over it. Your thoughts on the current war with Iran? I mean, I have a few thoughts actually on the current war. I'm wondering, I mean, like, why was Israel and America able to just effectively decapitate Iran, right? Like, it took out not only the leader, but like 40 high-ranking officials, all in just like airstrikes. That means they must have had like very accurate intelligence as to where these people were. Now, some people, I guess, like some person was trying to frame it as like, the leader guy, he was kind of old. He was like 86 and was probably dying. So he kind of pulled like an Obi-Wan Kenobi, you know, like seeing like, well, you know, I'm going to let myself die, be killed by them so that my death can be used for the cause, right? Like, might as well, like if I just die of natural causes sometime soon, then it won't, you know, serve as a lightning rod. But if I allow myself to be martyred, now there's a cause to be rallied behind. You know, that's what it's, I think Wang Wenichan said that some people were speculating. Then I'm wondering if that's the case. Okay, that might be the case, but then what? You're gonna have your entire family die with you as well, as including like, you know, a lot of top officials? That doesn't really. I feel like that's a little bit of a stretch, to be honest. I feel like the real truth is probably that Mossad has well infiltrated Iran. That, you know, it's kind of like the tale as old as time, you know, with Russia and Iran in the United States. It's always kind of like Russia and Iran are both kind of like holding out for some sort of like happy medium where they can both exist and life can just go on as normal. You know, China appears to be like that. But China's not stupid, right? You know, China appears to be like that. But like I said last time, Deng Xiaoping was like, well, we don't have to just do war communism or economic communism. We can do both, right? We were just kind of like doing this war communism this entire time, but what if we showed people that communism is better by default, by just showing that it's better? But we're not going to, you know, put our foot off the gas in military development either. We're going to, you know, develop our technologies and buy shit from Israel so that we could, copy the American shit. And Russia kind of like, obviously because of the Cold War and all this other stuff, it already has 5,000 nukes, right? So it kind of like already has guaranteed its autonomy in a limited amount of way, but yeah, it kind of still fools itself into thinking that the West can be negotiated with. Even right now, even the fuck right now, like still Ukraine is still at its fucking borders being all pain in the ass. And it's just kind of like, I think that just goes to show that if Iran was infiltrated this much by Mossad, China was probably already aware of that fact. And that's probably the main reason China didn't intervene itself. Because it's always kind of like predicated on the... You can't liberate a people that don't want to be liberated, Just the fact that infiltration existed proved to China that its people still were not serious. And that's the thing with all these fucking Islamists, this Middle Easterners. They only think in terms of like, what is morally righteous, or these idealistic fucking bullshit nonsense things. They don't think like, hey, what is China doing? What would benefit China in doing this action, right? If it directly, how does China benefit from that? And then B, how does China lose from that? What does China stand to lose if it like, and a lot of that is pretext, right? A lot of that, if it directly intervenes, now it has given pretext to the United States for further escalation, further action. And what would be the benefit of that? Because China right now, it can handle a fight from the United States. But it still needs a little bit more time to handle it with minimal fucking damage to itself. I've been following, obviously, like some military analysts. And at the moment, China's still kind of like bolstering its own nuclear weapons capabilities. And, it's got its kind of own Iron Dome type thing going on. Like all those fucking, Reddit posts of bombing the Three Gorges Dam. Like China's aware. China's aware of these Reddit posts, right? It's not stupid. Or it is aware how fucking genocidal and maniacal white people are. It's not a stupid place. It's obviously built, or is building, in the process of continuing to build defenses against such sort of provocations to its people that could result in the deaths of tens of millions of its people. Of course, it's constantly monitoring all those threats. But like I said in a post before, it's kind of like it learned. It learns from its mistakes, right? It was like, well, what was the success of Vietnam and Korea predicated on? Well, first of all, Vietnam and Korea are both its next door neighbors, right? It's right there. So China had more of not just an ideological rationale of communism, but like a real politic defense rationale of like, get the fuck out of our borders. Like this is a, so that it could relate that to its people. And the people who fought in Korea and Vietnam for China, they both inherently understood, if Korea falls or if Vietnam falls, that's a serious threat to our national defense. So in those cases, that sort of like proximity, but also that proximity was like built a lot of cultural similarities between Vietnam and Korea, and most obviously Confucianism, and this kind of dialectic was easy for it to kind of understand Chinese communism and implement it into their own kind of like systems or whatever of governance. So we can see dialectically why China considered like Korea and Vietnam successes, right? But then what were the failures, right? There was Malaysia, there was Indonesia, there was Burma, I believe. It was also kind of like trying to instigate like all the fucking like Southeast Asia places were kind of outside the periphery, and Chinese people in general did not have a good reputation in a lot of these Southeast Asian countries. And so it was easier for America to subvert their efforts, both geographically, right? Because now you got to travel by sea, right? And which America has that same, if not better, access to with their Navy. And not only that, because of the cultural differences and because of kind of the anti-China sentiment, now it's like, oh, well, it's kind of hard to support their efforts in communism there because some of them don't even support us in general, or some people think we're their enemies, right? And so in the case of Iran or anywhere in the Middle East or anywhere outside of even China's immediate periphery, like it learned already. Like Indonesia, we lost. Indonesia was like a huge target in the Cold War for both America and China, and they lost. And Cambodia, well, that was a disaster, a total disaster. We bet on the farm. We bet the farm on the mad fucking Frenchman, Pol Pot, and we fucking lost, right? And then notice after 1979, that's why China did not engage in any military action after that. It kind of was like, all right, we lost. We lost Indonesia, we lost Malaysia, we lost Cambodia. What do we learn here? Well, we can't help the people that don't want to be helped. We can't liberate people in the case of Indonesia, all that genocide was helped along by a lot of their country people, the citizens. In the case of Cambodia, they gambled with the wrong sort of retard who did not properly instill the values of communism to its own people or its leadership. They didn't even know what communism really was. The Khmer Rouge, most of its leadership didn't know what communism really was. They just saw it as a way to gain power ideologically quickly because of its connection to Mao and China. And so, what does it learn from that? Well, and then it also observes, Russia and how it fell, right? It got embroiled in all these different fucking wars itself in Eastern Europe. And, it was almost drawn into conflict with America during the, 1973, the Yom Kippur War, right? It saw that Russia, for all its efforts in kind of intervening in all these places, and especially in Afghanistan, that was its kind of death knell, right? It got got too invested in this place that didn't want communism at the time, I guess, or had a significant faction, right, that was fighting against communism in Afghanistan. So it was just kind of like China was like, well, not doing that, not getting, not pot committing ourselves to a war that we don't know what's going to be the outcome of. We don't know whether the people themselves will rise up again. And this is like so far from us that, like, you know, that's why America has that aircraft carrier, right? It has Israel right there, you know, and it's all of its military bases in Saudi Arabia and the UAE and all these other places. They have a fucking base of operations to conduct in. And what does China have? China doesn't have anything in that area. What is it supposed to do? Just like fucking fly over some random, like, you know, fucking shit to get demolished? And like, it doesn't even fucking make sense. If they want to, let's say they wanted to help Iran, well then they would have to commit a large force. And how are they going to maintain that? Like, what, in the bases of like Pakistan or whatever? Then like risk kind of like, you know, shit fuckery from India, whatever. Like, you have no idea. Like, these pieces are not just like things on a chessboard you could just move around and expect in like this fucking Goy cattle Trotskyite view of the world that like China's, you know, just going to march in there and be like, that's not how things are going to be done here. And it's just like such an infantile view of reality and how war even actually works. And then the latest thing, right? The analysis of Iran. It's like, how was it decapitated so easily? First of all, it didn't even fucking, you know, they all fucking win Fall For It Again awards. Like, Gaddafi won Fall For It Again awards, you know. Saddam Hussein won a Fall For It Again award, you know. Syria, that guy won a Fall For It Again award. It's like Islamists keep losing, like, winning Fall For It Again awards, you know. You know, not to mention the other fucking, you know, Muslim countries that just directly ally with Israel, like, you know, Saudi Arabia and whatever. It's just kind of like, unless you're a true Marxist-Leninist party that kind of identifies the realities of imperialism and why you need nukes, you know? It's like, why should China take your liberation project seriously if you yourselves don't even take your liberation project seriously? You know? That's why it's just kind of like all these fucking Westerners, these people who are anti-Israel, whatever, and that fucking blame China for not doing anything. I'm like, you guys are fucking retarded. Like, where were you in the Korean War? You're still spewing nonsense about the DPRK being this evil place. And you have the fucking gall to say that China is being, you know, selfish for not intervening. It's like, you still, this one place where it was correct to intervene, you criticize it for, because you're so retarded, you eat all the fucking goy slop, this place, but then you turn around and criticize it for not doing that same thing when you criticized it when it did do that same thing and it was successful. It's because you guys are fucking Nazi scum. Whether you're fucking Goy cattle Trotskyite or Goy cattle Nazi, you know, you're all fucking anti-Asian pieces of shit. I agree, and I think the USA is entering now stages of humiliation. Doug, can you explain again why China had to go with war with Vietnam in 1979? Well, it didn't have to. But I think it was operating on a few bad intel and stuff that originated with Mao's commitments to Pol Pot. So long story short, I mean, this is kind of how I see it, but basically, after the 49 Chinese Revolution, and then Korean War, obviously, kind of like the United States and Eisenhower, they came up with this, you know, concept. I'm not sure which came first, chicken or the egg, but they came up with this domino theory concept where they was like, well, we can't allow any of these places to turn communist because then that'll turn all of them communist. So one domino, is gonna, knock them all over. So we gotta, it was kind of like, we gotta make sure all these dominoes don't turn communist because like that's why we have to keep our presence in the Southeast, like in the Asian Pacific region, going. It's not just Korea that could fall. It's all these other places that could fall. Vietnam's next, right? After Dien Bien Phu in 1954. So China at first has a good relation with Vietnam, right? Because it's supporting Vietnam in its independence and its communist stuff. The problem is the Cold War kind of turns into a tripolar Cold War after the Khrushchev speech is leaked. So the Khrushchev speech is the secret speech so Stalin dies in 1953. I think there's a little bit of power struggle, and then 56 or so, Khrushchev, I think, takes power. And then 2 years later, I think their secret speech, called the Khrushchev secret speech, is leaked in 1958. And this speech was basically super anti-Stalin, basically saying that Stalin sucks, and it was leaked by an Israeli agent, of course, to the West. But basically, it was giving all the ammo to Western people about how Stalin was this evil dictator and all this other stuff to basically fuck over Stalin and his entire legacy. The reason for Khrushchev doing that is to legitimize his own kind of like power as now the premier of the Soviet Union by kind of like shitting on Stalin, but also to kind of like hopefully it's kind of like not unlike Yeltsin or Putin or all these other people in Russia today of like trying to play nice with the United States, being like, all right, let's just be nice, and you let us oligarchs be oligarchs, and we won't, do shit, whatever, right? They thought they could negotiate with terrorists, which is the United States and the UK. And so this caused a divide because Mao was like, bro, no, Stalin was the GOAT. He was, the reason, they defeated the Nazis, and this was the end of fascism and all this other stuff. It's ironic because Mao and Stalin actually didn't have the best of relationships themselves. But Mao understood what Stalin's legacy meant, especially for the Soviet Union, especially for the cause of communism. And this caused the Sino-Soviet split, where now they're kind of vying for control of the international communist movement. Because before that, the Soviet Union kind of assumed pole position, being the leader of communism. And now you have China being like, nope, they are revisionists and they are betraying the movement. Now we are the true communist movement. And so they start even competing, right, in the sphere for influence. And of course, the DPRK, North Korea, they had during the Korean War, they had obviously before this was before the split, so they had both the support of Moscow and Beijing. So Kim Il Sung was kind of like suspect of both. So he had his own purges in the 1950s of all Soviet or Chinese influence to keep Korea more Korean in character. Korean characteristics were kept in place, and general autonomy of the DPRK preserved, right? But that meant that Kim Il Sung was still kind of like, even throughout the split, you know, he was still friendly with Mao, but he also had to be friendly with the Soviet Union because they were still right on their border as well. Like, DPRK is literally at the border of both Russia and China. And, you know, Russia was one of its highest trade partners, especially with agricultural stuff. So kind of had to like play both sides, kind of like not unlike how it was during the 1800s when it was playing imperialists against each other to retain its autonomy as much as it could. But in the case of Vietnam, they were still embroiled in conflict, right? They after they drove out the French and their fucking, you know, quisling piece of shit South Vietnamese started to try to be like, well, we're gonna make a democratic side of Vietnam, just like in Korea. You know, they got a democratic side in the South, so we're gonna make a democratic side here. And then for the next fucking 20 years, America tried to make that a thing, right? And so, God damn it. So for a while, both China and the Soviet Union were again supporting North Vietnam through all that stuff. In addition, you know, Cambodia and Laos. Laos was more on the Vietnam project with socialism, but after the French were driven out, Cambodia started to try to do its own kind of thing. I think it was like I forgot who it was, but there was kind of like a power struggle in Cambodia as well. And throughout the Vietnam War, there was a party called the Khmer Rouge that was also kind of like vying for control and power in the country. And they decided to be kind of like the communist liaison or whatever, the communist kind of movement in Cambodia. So while the Vietnam War is happening, there's all this complicated shit going on, right? Because like America obviously wants to bomb the shit out of Vietnam. Vietnam is like, the fuck? We're just trying to get our independence from these fucking crazy Americans. And so Ho Chi Minh is like, bro, can you just like stop fighting about this? And, you know, to both the Soviet Union and China, he's like, bro, like, we're getting bombed here. So for the longest time, Ho Chi Minh is like keeping the fucking like Sino-Soviet split from going haywire, right? Because he had to. He was like, you know, I need both you guys to fight off this fucking Agent Orange and napalm and bombs away, like more bombs. You know, there was more bombs in the Vietnam War than there were in the entire World War II for America. I think that was the case. It was the case for both the Korean and the Vietnam War, but the Vietnam War was like even more so. More bombs against the Vietnamese and the Koreans than there were for the Nazis and the Japs, you know, combined. But anyway, Vietnam War still going on. 68, 69, he dies. Ho Chi Minh dies. And around this time, too, is when China starts pulling its stuff out of Vietnam. For whatever reason, it starts to see Vietnam as in the Soviet sphere of things. Because I think there was some sort of thing where in 1968, I think Lu Duan or whoever it was, basically there was some sort of thing where I guess it was implied that it was China was like, it's either our way or the highway. And Vietnam was like, well, we're still in war. We can't really not go the Soviet way because they provide us with a lot of heavy machinery that we need to defend ourselves with. And so I guess China took this as an insult and whatever. This is the stuff that Ho Chi Minh was like, guys, can we just not? But then Zhou Enlai, he's best buds with Zhou Enlai. But then, once he's dead, and Zhou Enlai is having his own troubles during the Cultural Revolution, right? It's kind of like only Mao's way or the highway. So it's just kind of like, all right, well, we're pulling our shit out. So the Vietnamese, they're like, the fuck is going on with that? Like, what? You're just gonna pull out because you're gonna lessen support because of that? That's so fucking petty, right? In the meantime, Nixon gets into office, I think, in 69. And he promises in his campaign that he's going to get them out of Vietnam. But instead, what he does is like, what if we just bombed the shit out of Cambodia and Laos and went the other way? So they bomb the shit out of Cambodia, right? And this displaces everyone and causes like the rise of this fascist dictator Lon Nol to gain power. I think in like the early 70s. Who the original, like the government before and the Khmer Rouge were both against this Lon Nol guy, right? So then, obviously North Vietnam still backs any force against this Lon Nol guy, whatever, because this Lon Nol guy is pro-U.S. and whatever. So they back the Khmer Rouge, I think, still there in the early 1970s, and as does China. And so by 1975, there's a lot of moving parts going around because, like, America starts to pull out of Vietnam too, right? It doesn't fully pull out until 1975, of course, but it starts to pull out a little bit. Throughout all this kind of confusion, Lon Nol is taking power, and then he's getting, ousted by the Khmer Rouge. And so it all looks like good stuff. But then, like, towards the end of the Vietnam War, the Khmer Rouge is actively attacking northern Vietnamese positions. And it's just like, what is going on, bro? And so soon afterwards, after kind of like Khmer Rouge take control in Cambodia, I think in 1975, that's kind of like the start of the regime of the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia. And, I'm sure a lot of you have heard about the Cambodian genocide and all that stuff. Obviously, saving Cambodia from a genocide, that wasn't what started the war with Vietnam and Cambodia. What started the war with Vietnam and Cambodia is that in addition to cleansing out Vietnamese and Chinese factors from the Khmer Rouge itself, that's what the Khmer Rouge were doing. They're also attacking Vietnamese people on Vietnamese soil. There was a fucking like atrocity where 3,000 Vietnamese people were killed. So that's why the Vietnamese intervened in Cambodia was like, yeah, this regime is fucking bullshit, and ousted that regime. And then Deng Xiaoping in 1979 was like, well, we can't. This looks bad on us because now Vietnam as a Soviet satellite is trying to impose its will on the region, and we gotta remind these guys who's the actual boss in the region, because we got former commitments to the Khmer Rouge itself. It's just kind of like it's kind of like how World War One happened, right? It's just kind of like, well, these Serbian terrorists, they got to be they got to get punished. Serbia's got to get punished, right? Austria's like, we got to punish those Serbians, and the Russia's like, well, can't let that happen because we're buddies with the Serbs. And then Germany was like, well, you're gonna have to answer to us if you're gonna attack the Austrians and all that other stuff. So that was more kind of like what China's whole investment in that thing was, because they were like, well, we backed the Khmer Rouge back in the 1960s and 1970s, early 1970s, and they seemed to be above board then. So all this kind of atrocity stuff, that seems like, the Holodomor stuff or whatever, and all this other stuff. Because, like, at the time, in the 1970s, still wasn't as, especially in Cambodia, right, underdeveloped regions of the world, there was no technology to really know what was going on, right? So that was why China had to go to war with Vietnam. It was a very short war. It wasn't really like anything big, but it was basically to remind Vietnam who was boss in the region, I guess. And so I think the effect of that was that Vietnam had to pull its forces from Phnom Penh, nothing too terrible happened from that, but it did obviously bring a sour taste in Vietnam's mouth as regard to China, right? Because it's like, what the fuck you doing, bro? But yeah, I attribute it to bad intelligence, bad commitments, and manipulation by Kissinger. He was very good. He's a good mastermind. He was a very good manipulator, that's for sure. A lot of people don't know this, but the one-child policy was initially a Kissinger idea. So that sly dog, had a lot of things negative that happened to China. But anyway, I digress. Southeast Asia's own internal xenophobia was holding them back. I mean, like invasion of Venezuela, how it happened so fast just doesn't make sense. Yeah, it just means that those people, they're still goy cattle at the end of the day. It's just like any country that keeps winning fall for it again wars from the United States and Israel and the UK, you're just kind of like a goy cattle country, or an Untermenschen cattle country, like whatever the interchangeable term you want to make is. It's just kind of like every country in the Middle East. And it all started with the 73, right? The Yom Kippur War. Where Egypt was like, all right, we're not commie anymore. We'll make deals with Israel. Well, we can coexist. We can be friends, right? 73, that's what Egypt did. It's like, give back some of that territory you stole from us in 67, and we'll call it even. We don't have to deal with these Soviets anymore. we don't think that Marxism Leninism is necessary for our freedom or liberation. Idiots blaming China for Venezuela. No, why not blame Brazil? Yeah, exactly. Brazil is right there. Or, you know, the fucking cartel in Mexico, also right there. Why isn't the cartel helping? China, they can't win with Trotskyites, so they just do their own thing. Vietnam is preparing for a second possible war against the United States. The U.S. is thinking they have Vietnam on their side is hilarious. Khrushchev single-handedly destroyed the Eastern Bloc, essentially. Yeah. Kissinger is still very popular in China. Well, that's because a lot of those Chinese people are also goy cattle. Just because you're Chinese, just because you live in China, doesn't mean your consciousness has been raised to an advanced state, right? Not everyone in China is communist, right? You got your Manchus. If you guys know who that is, he's like this gay man who likes white dick, failed astronomer. He's like a Chinese ultra, but he's like, you know, he's kind of like a guy who says that China is like fascist, a racial fascist state, as a Chinese ultra. So yeah, you're kind of just goy cattle if you think that Kissinger is a good guy. But that's why I don't really follow or listen to Chinese ultras, because their one-sided analysis is always going to be void of content, right? It's not going to be dialectical. Cuba is the only serious country in the Western Hemisphere. Well, even Cuba has kind of won some Fall For It Again awards here and there as well. I haven't looked into it too much, but it seems like they're trying to play ball with the Western liberal Trotskyites in order to gain recognition, somewhat in the same way that Taiwan does with liberals. Not really understanding that they're both goy cattle conduits for self-destruction, you know. Manchu is trying to be a Chinese BAP, has a speech impediment, if I recall correctly. Yeah, you know what Manchu backstory is? He's like this gay dude who's into white dudes. You know, he has WMAF mind virus, right, as a gay man. Not only that, apparently he was too dumb to be like an astronaut or something. But like, you know, he's like one of those like 120 IQ midwits. 120, 125 IQ midwits who, like, because they're smarter than like 80% of people, they think they're geniuses, but they're actually just like another level of goy cattle. Because all he really does is Kang. That's how you know who a goy cattle is. A goy cattle is anyone who just like their entire politics is just Kanging about what their people did or people do or whatever. You know, whether it's, you know, the white supremacist who glazes Tool Society or this futuristic Hyperborean fucking, you know, paradise in Iceland, you know, that's or in Antarctica, that's the Nazi, you know, homeland or whatever, or whether it's that kind of Kanging, or whether it's fucking Afro-Zionist Kanging of like, everything was made by Africans, black people, everybody was a black person at one point, etc., etc. This sort of fucking, you know, Kanging, so to speak, or it's the same thing as Manju kind of goy cattle saying that like, oh, it's because Chinese people, especially the Manchurian, the northern China, it's the virility of those Chinese that avoided this third worldist fate. It's just kind of like this inverted Kangism, or it's all Kangism. All goy cattle stuff, all Kangi is goy cattle stuff. It's like the inversion of like being really proud of your national, of your identity, just by its value of its identity in the world, speaks to how impotent you actually are in real life, that you need this sort of like extra boost in your identity to provide value and meaning for yourself in existence. And therefore, inverted, it's goy cattle behavior. All Kanging is goy cattle behavior. You think you're not goy cattle by Kanging, but in actuality you are, because it's almost kind of like the master-slave dialectic. You're positing that you're the master consciousness with your Kanging, but because you're this master consciousness, it's not you who is doing the actual deeds that you're Kanging about. You're just separated from that and assume that those deeds are for yourself, but they're actually for the people that were doing them. So in actuality, you're trying to Kang your own being for itself into existence, which therefore doesn't exist, because you have to will it into existence. You're a failed astronaut, so you have no other meaning in your life besides trying to Kang as if you are something in reality. Kissinger Nobel Peace Prize winner, lol. When it comes to Kissinger, they mostly like him for bringing the honeymoon phase with the United States. Well, yeah. I mean, okay. But that's analytical thinking, right? That's only thinking, oh, because Kissinger brought positive stuff to China, that means he's all positive. Well, that's just simplistic, non-dialectical thinking. Here it fucking is. Fist. Here's what? Falcon Maltese. Didn't Manju get kicked out of the party? Manju was never part of the Communist Party. Kidding me? Or was he? I don't think he was even a part of the party. Nobel Prize is just a Western Imperialism Award. Nobel Prize is just like, how many people did I sell dynamite to that I need to make this prize up to whitewash my legacy by making up this Peace Prize award nonsense. John Birch Society people are the biggest goy cattle cuckolds. I don't even know what John Birch Society is. We was Changs. Negation of the negation. Exactly. True Kangers, true Kangs do not need to Kang. True Kangs are the negation of the negation. I had to ask my Jewish friends to go to his people to stop persecuting me. The beast is loose, Panthers. I don't get it. I had to ask my Jewish friends to go to his people to stop persecuting me. I don't know. I guess what is to be done? What is to be done, everyone? I feel like everyone's been asking that, right, on the internet. What is to be done? What, like, there's this like honest question. What, as an American, am I supposed to do, right? All these answers from non-Americans, anti-Americans, Americans. I feel like the first thing you need to realize is that, I mean, people haven't even fucking realized this yet. So the first step is realizing you're in a goy slop matrix to begin with, right? Where voting does not make a difference in the outcome, where the entire government is oriented towards imperialism and has been since, I mean, especially in America since 1945, right? Not that it wasn't before that either. You know, obviously the Mexican-American War and the Spanish-American War, et cetera, were also imperialist. But yeah, we took a front seat after World War II, of course. I think the first thing, what is to be done, is to get everyone else on board, right? You can't really do shit. That's the thing. You can't really do shit. Like I said about Iran, like China. If the people in Iran are too goy-cucked to understand what is needed for their liberation, aka Marxism and Leninism, then there's no point in China trying to help them, right? So in the same way, what would cause China to even want to help the United States? Well, it would have to know for a fact that enough people in America understand that they need liberation to begin with, right? Most people in the United States, I mean, let's see. I mean, 64% of Americans came out for the 2024 presidential elections, or 64% of eligible voters. So yeah, okay, let's say even just, you know, like 64%. That means you have 64%. You know, obviously I voted, but like I don't believe in the system. But so let's just say that 60%, right? Maybe 4% like me voted ironically, and just for funsies, right? But let's say the 60% of the country that voted. That's a huge amount of people that still believe in the system, right? You guys watch that Matrix scene where he's like, it's the agent training program, right? It's the whole thing where when you're in the Matrix, we do want to free everyone here. But everyone here still is accustomed to the system. Like the system is their way of thinking. They cannot think outside of this system. So until we free them, everyone is a potential agent. Everyone, you know, the agent can turn into like whatever, all those fucking people whenever they want because they're still plugged into the system and they still believe in the system. And so it's the same thing with Americans, right? You know, you go into the Matrix, you go into the American Matrix, try to free them, they might just turn into agents and just fucking kill you. You know, so the absolute first step is to first educate yourself, right? Like when I see these things, like, what as an American am I supposed to do about all this? Well, it's to be like, wait a second. So what is the truth of all this war we're getting into? You know, that was my start, right? I didn't grow up communist out of the womb. I didn't grow up Marxist Leninist. I didn't grow up a dialectical materialist in 1983. It's not something you just fucking are. You're not just like a communist from birth or whatever, or not. You know, an anti-communist. You know, it's not this like metaphysical thing. It's the thing you fucking dialectically, you know, materialize out of yourself, out of your own development, out of your own mental development. And for me, witnessing all these anti-Asian hate crimes and connecting it to America's anti-China rhetoric, I was like, oh yeah. And then reading Lenin's imperialism, it all kind of fucking came together. I was like, yeah, this is why things are the way they are. So the first thing, especially if you're, you know, asking this question to begin with, what as an American can I even do? Well, the first thing is educate yourself. Put on your own oxygen mask, right? Got to put on your own oxygen mask. Got to be like, all right, this is what's going on. I'm not going to listen. I'm not going to eat the fucking goy cattle from the Nazis, or the goy slop from the goy cattle Nazis, or the goy slop from the goy cattle Trotskyites. I got to go to the source. I got to go to Lenin. I got to go to Mao. I got to go be like, oh, you know, this is what Mao and Kim Il-sung were like. Yeah, Israel is a fucking imperialist base. So what does that even fucking mean? Well, you got to fucking read what they said. These places that America and Israel told you were these evil places for the past 50, 60, 70 years. Maybe the first step is be like, what if they weren't these evil places this entire time and they were actually the good guys? So the first step, the real first step for any American is being like, what if we weren't the good guys this entire time? Let me just do a hypothetical thought experiment. Just put yourself in the mind of an alien from outer space, right? Not as an American, not as an anti-American, just like an objective alien from outer space being like, what if I examine history from the point of view that America was not the good guy? And then when you view history like that, you're like, wait a second, why did we get involved in World War I? Well, we were financing France and England. And if France and England lost, we're not going to collect on those debts. So we got to send 100,000 of our American boys to make sure we can collect. You know, why did we get into World War II? Well, you see, the Soviets weren't doing as poorly as we anticipated. And the Japs are kind of encroaching on our allies' territories in Southeast Asia. So maybe we gotta fan the flames a little bit here and there. Grease the engines of war so we can stop the Soviet advance in Berlin. And stop the Soviet advance in halfway through Korea. And be like, this is our territory now. Thanks. You know? Why do we fight the Mexican-American War? Oh, well, we just needed these 4 states for ourselves. We just needed all this extra territory. These Mexicans don't deserve this territory. We need it. Why did we get into war with Spain in 1898? Well, we needed to liberate the Cubans and the Filipinos and the Puerto Ricans and all those people. We needed to liberate them from Spanish imperialism. We needed to make them into protectorates and territories, right? You know, why didn't we go to war with Korea? What did they ever do to us? Well, we had to save them from communism. We had to save these traitors, these people who betrayed their own country, the Japanese. We got to protect those guys. And in the midst of that, we protect democracy. Protecting those guys, those fascist fucks, protecting democracy. Why do we go to war with Vietnam? Well, you see, same thing. Catholics are being attacked. Catholicism is being attacked in Vietnam. We need to make sure that Catholicism is right there in the mix, even though we're a Protestant country, you know. Make sure those crazy Vietnamese don't become communists because they don't know what they're doing for their own good. We need to show that. Never mind the fact that we let them be colonies of France for the longest time. We let all these places be Indonesia. We let be a colony of the Dutch. But now we care about their freedom because, God forbid the Chinese give them these communist ideas. God forbid. We need to relieve them of their terrible ideas, of their terrible communist ideas, and give them actual freedom. Never mind for the fact that for the past 200, 300 years of Americans' existence, we didn't give a fuck about their freedom, not one bit. We didn't give a fuck that the British or the French or the Dutch were raping and killing everyone in the region for their own fucking, including us, including the Philippines too. We didn't give a fuck about that. But now we give a fuck. It's like the first thing you gotta do is understand that besides the War of Independence and the War of 1812, America was, in fact, the bad guy. And in the case of World War II, it was only being the good guy out of self-interest. Or of trying to appear to be the good guy in self-interest, right? I guess the Civil War is one of the good wars, but that was against itself, of course. But yeah. It's like the first thing an American has to do is be like, what is the character of America? What is the true character of America? What is the source of its power? What is the source of its quote-unquote excellence? And how does that relate to, a lot of people kind of like have a little bit of an idea because of like slavery and all this other stuff and Native American stolen land. But that's only like going halfway, right? Like, yes, that. But then a lot of stuff happened after that, especially the exploitation of South America and Latin America. A lot of that came after World War II, as well as a lot of the labor that came out of Asia, the economic development that supercharged the American economy with the building of the railroads, etc., etc. Just kind of like understanding the actual economic material essence of America and its imperialism. That's like the first step. If you don't know that, if you don't know how America made its bones, how America developed, then you're just going to run around in circles. You're never going to get to the root of everything. So that is the only thing that can be done at this level of historical development, especially in American public consciousness. Everyone is so fucking like goy-cucked in America that like to think beyond this is kind of putting the cart before the horse. You're being idealistic. You need to like recognize that the level of consciousness in America is retardation levels. And the first step is to be like, okay, what is the character of American imperialism? That is the first step. And that's why I do what I do, right? I try to get to the bottom of things. I try to uncover the historical materialist, roots of everything that's going on, right? And writing my fucking Substack shit. I'm writing another one this weekend. I haven't really gotten to because of all this Iranian craziness. Sometimes I do get, self-crit. I'm not always motivated to help. Sometimes I'm just like, like I say all the time, I'm like Jonah, and I see these fucking Americans as these fucking retarded Ninevites, and I'm like, you know what? I need to just get into my China whale and get the fuck out of here. I get constantly spit back out by the whale. I'm like, fuck. I'm here. I'm still in America. Sometimes I see the stuff in Iran and I'm like, what's even the point? These goy cattle Americans are so fucking goy cucked. They don't understand anything. They don't understand anything because they refuse. They're like that. They're like that daughter in the mafia. They don't want to know. They really don't want to know. They know deep down inside that they're responsible. So they don't want to know specifically how. Because if they don't know how, they can always claim a distance from it. They can claim it exists outside of me. It is a being for itself. It's not my being for myself. I can extricate it from my consciousness, and therefore it doesn't exist. And therefore, as long as shit's fine in America for me, as long as there's no draft taking me out to Vietnam that I don't have to complain about anymore because the draft was ended after the Vietnam War. But maybe if it does, maybe then I'll make a big stink out of it. But until that happens, man, what's those Palestinians have to do with me, right? What's the connection? I don't see the connection. It's not my problem. So Palestinians' problems for being there. Why don't they just move? Why don't they just move? Why don't the Muslims just move? Did they ever think about that? Why don't they just continue to let Israel take more and more land? Why don't just stop being belligerent and just give Israel the entire region? Why don't they just do that? They ever think about that? Oh, man. Let's see. What can you do as Asian American? Make plans, or American needs to quit their jobs? Well, that's not happening. Later, a real NYLP. It's hard not to get into the party these days. A lot of Chinese college kids do it as default, just in case Java or twos. Oh, interesting. I would have thought though that Xi Jinping would have tightened the ship up a little bit in the past 12, 13 years. It's too difficult and a cult. What's too difficult and a cult? Well, the all quitting their jobs thing probably won't happen. Again, until people see it as a life or death sort of situation. Iran had 40 years to build a nuke. In the end, they only have themselves to blame. I mean, you're not wrong. You're not wrong. It's just kind of like if a place is saying you're a week away from building a nuke or whatever every fucking 5 years. You see, that was the thing when Kim Jong-il was they were trying to make nuclear proliferation treaty deals with the United States in the 1990s, right? Trying to make peace, but then every time it wasn't North Korea that reneged on its agreements. It was the United States who was reneging every time when they tried to make an agreement. And then so finally, when 2002, George Bush is like, they're the axis of evil, Iran, Iraq, and North Korea. And Kim Jong-il is like, all right, if we're the bad guy, we'll be the fucking bad guy. We'll fucking make the nukes. You know, Iran never got that message. For some reason, for whatever reason. They saw what happened to Iraq in 2003 after the axis of evil was announced. And they were like, oh, well, maybe if we don't build nukes like North Korea did, we'll get off that list. Like, what? That's what being an Islamist versus a Marxist-Leninist is. It's just kind of like... It's just like this idealism of like... I don't know. Allah will provide idealism, you know? It's just kind of like... And that's why, you know, that's why fucking Marx and Engels wrote like 600 pages saying why metaphysics was useless jibber jabber, you know? Talking about Feuerbach, talking about Stirner, talking about all these other Hegelians who were going into this fucking jibber jabber metaphysical nonsense about how society was going to just self-improve. Americans make too many excuses. They can understand situation dire, but then say we'll got work tomorrow. Americans are nihilist consumers. Yeah, I mean, but I wouldn't just limit it to just Americans. It's pretty much everyone in the West. Everyone in the West, all those fucking Islamist states, especially the ones that made deals with Israel, everyone's on the hook, right? It's not just Americans, especially not the British. British are not off the fucking hook, for sure. I hate all these fucking posts on Twitter being like, American Israel or the blah, blah, blah. It was like, whatever happened to fucking Britain, France, and the rest of fucking Europe? Those fucking pieces of shit Nazis. They deserve to fucking burn too. It's not like they had nothing to do with what's going on there. It's just like fucking nonsense. Most Americans still view China as the world's villain, despite all this China maxing nonsense. Why would China help? Exactly. Hello, friend. Hello, Goy Cluck. Your average economy, World War III, here we come. If voting mattered, they wouldn't let you do it. Exactly. Oh, I love you. Well, it's fine. He's single, I think. Admit the system can lie to you. Not in that way. I was being sarcastic. I'm thinking of posting the Yellow Knight in Palestine Reddit forum. Oh, why not? I mean, it's not Goy Slop, that's for sure. Doug, why is WMAF not a secondary contradiction? What the fuck are you even talking about? I don't even know why it would be a... What are you talking about? Do you think Iran will attack USA, the World Trade Center? It's owned by a Jew. No. I don't think Iran will attack the World Trade Center. First of all, that, I mean, if you're on this, you should know that most people here probably think that it was probably Israel who did that anyway. I was talking to my friends, and we were saying that Iran will attack New York City on July 4th for the 250-year anniversary. Well, that sounds like something Mossad would cook up and probably do, and then blame it on Iran. So if that happens, it was probably Israel. I got work tomorrow. See ya, holy cow. People are saying the Austin shootings or retaliation what happened in Iran. I don't even know what's going on in Austin. It's not. Nothing is retaliation. Everything that's saying that's retaliation is fucking Mossad. True. EU is complacent as well. Israel is more likely to attack World Trade Center. Lol. Yeah. Any sort of terrorist attack in the United States, that's fucking Mossad. My Asian brother, please defend and advocate for my nation. Iran-Yamir. I mean, I am. This is on my Twitch. Somebody messaged me. My Asian brother. Although, you better not be saying it as if, like, I'm pro intervention. You know, like one of those Iranian, like, feminoids, foids. But yeah. I don't know. At the end of the day, everyone's just kind of trying to point finger. Everyone's like, "Oh, Americans, it's your fault. Oh, blah blah blah, it's your fault. Blah blah blah." It's just like this is all still goy cattle nonsense, jibber jabbering. It's like, what is actually working? What has been working? What has actually been working? Who has been right this entire time? When people ask me what is to be done, or when Americans say what is to be done, until you recognize the root of American imperialism, and then until you recognize what is in the way of that imperialism, aka China and the DPRK, then you're starting from a position of nonsense. Without acknowledging those two things, you are going to just be goy slopping all over. And to me, there can't be any action that does anything. Because, like, you know, we saw what happened to that guy who burned himself saying free Palestine, right? We saw that guy who apparently killed a CEO, healthcare CEO, you know. Even if we assume that at face value was the guy, and even if we assume that this Tyler Robinson guy at face value was in Israel and just killed, you know, Charlie Kirk, right? What did that do? What did any of those assassinations accomplish? Nothing. Right? So unless there's like a base of ideology, a material base of people that all are aware, you know, until there's enough people outside of the matrix there can be no freeing the matrix. You know, it's like if one day you were the only person who was freed from the matrix, your first step isn't going to be like, hey, let's go to the fucking government building and, you know, destroy this building that's in the matrix already. Because then you're just going to get killed and everyone's going to think you're just a terrorist. The first step is to free other people, free the people who are most likely to be freed, and then get them all to band together to free more people. Free your mind, you know? Free your mind. Well, I have no intention of returning to a party that currently, in my view, is not doing what I'm advocating for. is in fact pursuing a strategy that is not working and continues to pursue that strategy. And so I do not want to waste my time with such drivel. What do you think of Russia modern day? I mean, it's just kind of like realizing that America's and the West is never going to really like accept the Russia that isn't cucked. Like after the fall of the Soviet Union, that was supposed to be a win, right? A win-win for all of us because now Russia's capitalist, now whatever. But I think like what America hates the most about Russia, it's not its former communist interests right now because it's not communist, but it's the fact that it still has 5,000 nukes, right? So because of those nukes, America can't just tell it what to do and boss it around. You can destabilize it to the point where communism was unpopular and got rid of that monkey off its back, I suppose. But it still wants to, America and the West are still imperialist, right? They want to take advantage of Russia in any shape or form that they can or exploit it, right? Because Russia has a lot of oil, there's a lot of resources, there's a lot of stuff that America wants to, or American corporations want to take for their own interests. And I think for the longest time, Russia, its elite, its oligarch elite, kind of assumed that it could just play ball with the West. But I think Putin, and not all, but some of the elites also probably recognize, okay, these motherfuckers are never going to relent. So I think Russia is kind of like, it obviously after the fall of the Soviet Union, it moved away from communism completely. But now, because of repeated antagonisms from the United States, it's starting to re-examine those relationships, especially with the DPRK recently, and especially with China. It's next door neighbor, right? But I wouldn't say Russia's on its way to becoming communist anytime soon, but it is kind of like at least considering playing both sides. Whereas I think before it was kind of trying to play ball with the West over China. ACP is probably filled with feds. Maybe not the ACP itself, but certain orbiters, perhaps. Certain orbiters. What do you think of Midwestern Marxist? They're okay. I met Eddie and Noah. Seem like pretty chill dudes. Little liberal on the liberal side for me, but generally speaking, they're theoretically okay. I feel that the West still hasn't forgave Russia's revolution. Yeah, probably. Funny how no one talks about Epstein now. USA and Israel attacked Iran as a distraction. Well, one could say that the whole Epstein files was meant for that distraction to begin with, right? Like, because if you notice the Epstein files, right, there's a few things that's interesting. It's A, that there's still a significant amount of the files that have not been released yet, right? I think they released like half of them now, or 30%, something like that. I don't know. There was still a significant amount not released yet. And B, although very very sensationalist and very gruesome and very detailed, all of that is still considered circumstantial evidence, right? There's nothing to legally prosecute those people because, you know, obviously I don't believe this, but the legal case can be made that Epstein made up this shit about everyone, right? There's no smoking gun that connects Trump or any of these people to a specific crime. However, the circumstantial evidence does point or does posit the existence of said evidence, right? Like, it's tough to believe that Epstein would do all this stuff, you know, gain all this sort of like incriminating stuff against all these powerful people and not have physical evidence of all that stuff, right? Like, I think when you think about like stuff like like intelligence operations like this in general, entrapment stuff like this in general, like getting videotape evidence is like the name of the fucking game, right? They try to do that. I think with this Indonesian guy once. This was like before the Jakarta genocide stuff, I think. But then they had a sex tape of the Indonesian leader doing this like stuff with these Russian prostitutes or something like that, I think, or whatever. Or I forgot who it was. If it was the KGB or the CIA. But somebody had the Indonesian president doing some sort of sexual stuff, and he was like, oh, cool. That makes me look base or something. I don't know. He didn't care. But it shows that that was a staple of intelligence, right? And so we do have, obviously, we have enough evidence that, like, you know, not from a legal perspective, but from a logical perspective, we're like, yeah, they did that shit, right? And this is not only that, you know, Epstein was most likely doing this on the behest of Mossad, right? So we have those in place. Then we can assume that Israel is in possession of said smoking guns. So then, working backwards, we can be like, okay, well, what do we know happened? On the outside, the Joint Chiefs of Staff and all these other military advisors, they told Trump not to invade Iran, right? And then so Trump said, I'm not invading Iran. Then you have these Epstein files come out. Limited Epstein files, right? And that wasn't the whole thing. It wasn't the whole shebang yet. Without a smoking gun, right? So now Trump's on notice, but he's still in power, right? He's on notice that there's likely hard evidence that can nail him to the wall. Fuck. But what the? God damn it. But he's aware that this evidence exists, but he's not prosecutable still. But he's kind of on notice. He knows, you know, maybe we can, maybe they're not going to release that if, you know, I play ball, right? And that's basically what happened. It's not that this was a distraction from the Epstein files. It's that this was the direct result from the Epstein files, right? By making it such that the Epstein files couldn't prosecute, but put the thing out there that you will be prosecuted, then it's like you know, it's kind of like a showing the stick in a way, right? Trump's entire presidential run was to prevent him from going to jail. I mean, I think his whole entire presidential run was basically to give Israel like a free hand, you know. I think there was a combination of things that was going on. The CIA understood that the buy-in into woke stuff was dying out, and so were the liberal appeals for Zionism. They realized that the Democratic Party still consisted of people who, while, you know, into identity politics and all that nonsense, whatever, were still like kind of like logically putting together that Zionism or Palestine was a racist fucking operation, and this contradiction was starting to appear in a lot of liberal leftist arenas. So they knew that in order for Israel to continue its project, its final solution of Gaza, it needed Trump to now be installed. So they reversed a lot of these fucking woke protocols. 2024. All these HR fascist woke Karen HR fascism. They made Trump look like he was the hero over all those things, and like he was a liberator, while the real reason they pushed him through was because they knew that he would give more of a free hand to Israel than the Democrats were. Part of that was also kind of reinforced with the assassination attempt in July in 2024. It's kind of like you could say you're anti-establishment all you want, but do you actually go off the reservation, you know it's coming for you, you know, because Trump acts like he's this self-sacrificial person, whatever, but he is such a fucking blatant, like, self-serving idiot. Like when he got COVID, for example, in 2021, or was it 2020 or 2021, he was all like, oh my god, am I gonna die, or whatever. He was all like freaking out. It was only after he like didn't die, you know, because he had like probably the actual coronavirus, the like cure in the CIA's Fort Detrick that they already had, right? So he didn't die, and then only after that he made his stupid brazen. They they tested my DNA and they only found USA or some bullshit nonsense. Anyway, lifelong Democrat as was Epstein. Yep. It's the same shit. It's the same fucking shit. The idea that there are two different parties is also goy cattle, goy slop propaganda. It was CIA about the Indonesian adult. Oh, okay. We already discussed ACP ourselves recently. Well, you know, I'd like to, you know, it's the same thing like when I was talking about before. You know, a couple of years ago, I was kind of like, I guess, optimistic. I was like, oh, okay, maybe there is enough people to start a party, to start a movement, to save America, right? But it's like, what are the fundamental things that I just said, right? It's, how is America imperialist? You know, how are we Carmela Soprano, right? What role did we have as Carmela Soprano this entire time, right? And then the second one, what is the only thing standing in the way of the mafia, of the mob that we're in, China and the DPRK, right? I feel like there still doesn't exist a party in America that understands those two things. And I'll add a third thing. The real start, the real time. Remember I mentioned that, Soviet Union got to communism because of World War One, right? Because people didn't want to be thrown into the German death fucking shit. And in China, it was because people saw the betrayal of people to the Japanese, especially in the KMT. They were like, yeah, I don't want to be a part of this fucking bullshit nationalist group that just wants to sell out everyone else for its own power, which was what Chiang Kai-shek was doing, right? He sold out. That motherfucker had 4 different allegiances in like 10 years, 15 years. He first he was like allied with the Germans, to get German technology. And then he was allied with the Soviet Union. Then he was allied with Japan itself to get more of their weapons and shit. And then he was allied with the United States. He just fucking... He's like a fucking scum piece of shit. And everyone's like, all right, well, this guy does not have any of our backs. And so what was the condition for America? The time it was most closest to a communist revolution, like I said, the Black Panther Party in the 1970s. It was during Vietnam. That was its one fucking time it was close to a communist revolution. So if an American party, Communist Party, not just the ACP, but any American communist movement or any communist party, if it can't even recognize, A, why am I Carmela Soprano? B, who is in the mafia's way? And C, what was the closest point at which America became communist? It was due to Vietnam. Wasn't due to, the civil rights movement, that too. It's all about Vietnam. Black people thinking they got their rights by, just sitting in the back of the bus and refusing to move, or sitting in places, sit-ins, and voting harder, and million-man marches in Washington D.C. They think that that's what's ended, or that's what got them civil rights. Wrong. What got them civil rights? Any progress in America was dictated from without, not from within. That's what caused the most closest revolution. The civil rights movement was a reaction against the growing movement for communism in America. So if an American communist movement can't even acknowledge these 3 basic points, it's worthless. It's a fucking joke. It's just going to run into another circle of like, well, it's just going to be another fucking Kanging circle. That's what it, all like impotent sort of nonsense. Any sort of movement politically that turns impotent just sort of devolves into Kanging. It's like, oh, well, look at the accomplishments of our predecessors. No one cares about that shit. No one cares about what you guys did before in the past. What are you doing now? It's just, fucking. It's just metaphysical jibber jabber. Like, I'm sorry. I just don't understand. It's like, maybe if your movement isn't growing for over a year now, kind of moving the other direction, maybe you're not doing something right. Maybe it's not that other people, because like that's what people do. They blame everything else except for themselves when things are going wrong in America. That's what Westerners do. They have no sense of dialectical thinking. They have no sense of self-critique. They have no sense of like acknowledging that there's a negativity within them that needs to be sublated for further development. That this concept doesn't fucking exist for Westerners. They only assume that I am in a position of correctness and therefore it must be accepted. It's like, that might be 95% true. But what about that 5% that doesn't relate to anyone? Like, how do we fucking improve? Like, the Asian communist will be like, all right, well, clearly we got a 95%. We need to get 100%. But the American is like, 95% is good enough. And then 95% after a while becomes 90%, because now they don't even think about the other 5% that's on the fence, and they kind of let that go to fucking shambles. And then continually, they don't fucking change. And that 95% becomes less and less and less as the world materially changes without them, and they constantly stay static to the same fucking bullshit nonsense that doesn't go anywhere, And this is every fucking leftist movement in America. I'm not singling out a party. I'm not singling out whatever. It's just like how it is in America. Just the way Americans think. It's just not very dialectical. They could have the most right, like 99% right, correct party today. But if they don't even like consider that 1%, and if they don't even consider that if they don't adjust, there could be more percentages lost because the world is materially advancing beyond that position, then they're just going to be fucking irrelevant. And the proof is in the material pudding, right? The proof is in the material of like, are there more people in your movement than there were yesterday? 10 days ago? A month ago? A year ago? Like, when are you going to take stock of actual performance and wonder, hey, maybe we need to do something differently here? Maybe, like the whole, like, it's not you, it's me, like, but actually. I'd add that the Great Depression was sort of close to Revolution 2. Well, yeah, but they weren't able to sublate that. How do you feel about anarchism? Anarchism is just idiocy. That's what it is. It's just self-serving adventurism. It has no value to anyone other than self-aggrandizement. That's what Lenin discovered. He even called his own brother, I mean, I don't know if he called him an idiot per se, but he called his attempt at the assassination of the Tsar to be ultimately meaningless. Even if they had been successful, like they were with, I think, Alexander too, right? What happened after Alexander II? It just created more fascism in Imperial Russia. It created more anti-Semitism. It created more, it legitimized basically their police stuff for more repression. So anarchism is just like it's wanting to get to the result without thinking about the dialectics behind how to get to that result, right? It's like wanting to get to the end point without sublating the different moments in order to get there, right? Because in Marxist theory, anarchism is kind of like the end of communism and the beginning of communism, right? Because you have primitive communism in the beginning, which resembles what anarchists believe is the ultimate like goal of human civilization, I suppose. But in Marxist thought, yeah, that's going backwards, right? And that's just not how humanity develops or historically materially develops. Because what happens, like what happened to the Native Americans who were anarchists, essentially, in the face of capitalist, imperialist economies, they were cannon fodder, right? They were just wiped off the face of the earth in like 100 years. So anarchism is just, yeah, it's a failed ideology. That's just doesn't do anything. It just allows the imperialists to just run you over, essentially, in the end. Anyway, I'm gonna head out unless anyone has anything else to say. Alrighty. I'll see you guys on Thursday. Take care now. Bye bye then. Good night.